In this chapter, we'll survey the variety of Holocaust texts written for adult readers in English since 2000, with particular attention to 4 critical motifs: intergenerational memory, perpetrator fiction, alternate history, and individual microhistories. Following a review of the field of the 21st century adult Holocaust literature in English, I'll provide examples of each of these phenomena and discuss the rationale underlying trends in this corpus. Now, the very enduring appeal of this field in a changing context deserves our attention. Contemporary works of Holocaust literature from North America, United Kingdom, Australia, and New Zealand demonstrate a persistent fascination with the grim history of the genocide, even as literary representations evolve to innovate new areas of focus and genres of text. What Annette Viaviorca identified as the era of the witness to refer to a period in the late 20th century in which survivor testimony and personal accounts became central to how the Holocaust is remembered and represented in literature, has given way to an era of access in which individuals personally engage with Holocaust memory on their own terms through digital platforms, personal travel to sites of memory, and narratives that creatively mediate survivor accounts. While the era of the witness was marked by the centrality of survivor voices and first-hand accounts, the current era is one in which Holocaust narratives are understood on individual terms, sometimes in ironic, sentimental, personal, or emotional ways that defy fidelity to the history of the genocide or remembrance practices of the past. Despite clear signs of literary diversification and cultural dissent, intensive preoccupation with the Holocaust clearly persists. The Holocaust continues to cast a long and somber shadow over English language literature in the 21st century. As in the last 2 decades of the 20th century, Anglophone literary texts about the Nazi genocide of European Jewry still proliferate in abundance through successive waves of publishing that are heterogeneous and distinct from earlier periods of Holocaust literature. This prolific stream of unabated publishing is remarkable, given that the earlier surge of literary writing about the Holocaust in the 1980s and 1990s is often tied to the aging of many Holocaust survivors who began to share their personal stories in testimony, memoirs, and literary texts. If an outpouring of personal memory by first-hand witnesses fueled the rapid growth of Anglophone Holocaust literature in the late 20th century, a different rationale must be found to explain the enduring prominence and appeal of such work in the early 21st century. Texts by descendants of survivors evince this multi-generational perspective. For instance, the American author Jonathan Safran Foer's novels Everything is Illuminated from 2002 and Extremely Loud and Incredibly Close from 2005 articulate an understanding of the past that's mediated by grandchildren's relationship to their grandparents. These texts interweave multiple narrative strands that layer a generational perspective of imaginative reconstruction of the past with the later descendants' later lived experience. A quotation in Incredibly Close encapsulates the links of trauma shared by family members in the wake of overwhelming loss. Foer's fiction also demonstrates an experimental use of diverse narrative forms, such as magical realism, postmodern forms of dialogue, and graphical typefaces. It's similar to Anita Diamond's The Boston Girl, a very different realistic work that weaves a narrative that spans continents and generations to explore the lingering effects of the Holocaust on a Jewish family who emigrates to America. Kaluki Nights, by the British author Howard Jacobson, interrogates the legacy of the Holocaust for generations of British Jews, insulated from any direct contact with it. This novel's comic deconstruction of that legacy, in order to parody the way in which the Holocaust has been fetishized, is voiced by the author of Jacobson's Holocaust-obsessed protagonist Max, as she scolds him. The only camp you ever went to was Butlins. This story is that of a young boy who is searching for the clues of his past in an experience that he did not know firsthand. Moreover, the widening of temporal distance from the genocide allows these writers to explore the past with greater freedom. This effect is apparent in the increase in the number of literary works that treat the Holocaust with more pronounced moral ambiguity and creative license. Emily Budick critically identifies this dynamic as the proclivity for, quote, an ambiguous and morally upsetting narrative that has changed the intended reader's position and relative moral proximity to the events being portrayed. In addition, the rise of perpetrator fiction and burgeoning interest in alternate histories are characteristic features of Anglophone 21st century Holocaust literature that express the desire for a more nuanced approach to collective memory, as well as unfettered creative license. Novels such as Martin Amis's 2014 Zone of Interest from Britain attempt to delve into what Saul Friedlander once called the moral abyss of perpetrator mentality. Such texts push the boundaries of the genre by exploring a perspective previously considered taboo. Nonetheless, this trend remains contested. Critics such as Aaron Anglophone and Robert Eaglestone argue that the literary landscape attempts to reveal the anathema contents of a perpetrator's mind, while simultaneously trying to sidestep or occlude it, to avoid navigating an ethical minefield of perspectives that can scarcely be successfully crossed without succumbing to identification with murderers. In addition, troubling elements in contemporary society, such as the global resurgence of virulent anti-Semitism and widespread turns towards ideologically extreme positions in politics the world over, spur authors to approach the Holocaust not merely as the illumination of a grim past, but a potential reflection of an ominous future. Such dark visions of the future reread the past as even more horrific than it was, to explore chilling scenarios of alternate history. What if Roosevelt had been defeated? What if Nazi Germany had won? What if the Jews had not found refuge in Israel? Such stories are played out in novels such as Philip Roth's The Plot Against America and Michael Chabon's The Yiddish Policeman's Union, or the Uber series by Kieran Gillen, or Dominion by C.J. Sansom. Such works consider how protagonists, and by extension us all, might be entangled in subversive efforts to reclaim a free society. These texts are just as animated by visions of the past as they are by dark fears of the future that see a correspondence between the events of the 20th century and the worst possibilities of the 21st. Even as the Holocaust recedes in time, it becomes more hauntingly relevant for many who are concerned about the state of civilization. Becca Cantor, the editorial director of the Jewish Book Council in the United States, says, "The Holocaust continues to compel readers and writers because it seems so unfathomable. But at the same time, it is an embodiment of our fears." These several factors have shaped 21st century Anglophone Holocaust literature and help account for some of the emergent features that distinguish it from earlier modes of writing about this genocide. The growing temporal distance from the historical events of the past century are counterbalanced by a troubling awareness of their increasing relevance for events today, and the emergence of a new cohort of authors who tackle this topic differently than was done in the past century. With the passing of survivors who witnessed the events firsthand, or even of bystanders who lived through it, few works by first-hand witnesses are now written, while far more are written by professional authors, many of whom lack any personal tie to the Holocaust. This influx of new authors has led to innovations of new genres and forms introduced since the turn of the century, and these include representations of the Holocaust not only as an historical event, but as a legacy, allegory, or warning that continues to shape individual lives and communities across generations. This new landscape of memory and literature reflects a growing awareness of the Holocaust's enduring cultural impact, with lingering effects on cultural memory practices, moral imagination, and the struggle to understand humanity's worst and best impulses. While the imperative of Holocaust remembrance and the exploration of its traumatic legacy remain unassailably important in the 21st century, the charge of memory has shifted in a substantial way towards contemporary media rife with historical misinformation. Critical discourse has emerged surrounding the seemingly symbiotic enthusiasm for Holocaust fiction among readers and publishers, and moreover, Holocaust memory is no longer separate or politically neutral, but is in fact infected by political debate about competitive victimhood and contemporary atrocity. This opaque environment created by digital misinformation and political polarization heightens concerns about the issues of historical accuracy in fictional narratives. Some works, especially those about individual victims or microhistories, have been criticized for containing factual discrepancies. A case in point is the commercially successful 2018 novel, The Tattooist of Auschwitz, by Heather Morris, an Australian author originally from New Zealand. In The Tattooist of Auschwitz, a tale that is presented as historical fiction based on the life of Leil Sokolov, an Auschwitz survivor whom Morris met late in Sokolov's life, a story that is set in Auschwitz-Birkenau is criticized for a host of factual inaccuracies. These historical errors were addressed in an exhaustive fact-finding article by the Research Center of the Auschwitz-Birkenau State Museum. The article by the museum states that the book contains numerous errors and information inconsistent with the facts, as well as exaggerations, misinterpretations, and understatements. The historical audit concludes on an acid note. Morris, quote, had the ambition to write a novel similar to a document and wanted memory and history to tread in perfect harmony in the book. Unfortunately, in spite of the help of archivists, as can be deduced from the acknowledgments included in the book, she was unable to accomplish this intention. But in assailing Morris's novel for being an illusion of a document rather than a genuine historical report, the museum's indictment unwittingly offers a vindication of the role of fiction. For literature, especially fiction, conjures up an illusion of reality that can be even more compelling than a carefully crafted historical report. Beyond historical fidelity and accuracy, commentators have raised additional anxieties regarding thematic choices prevalent in Anglophone 21st century Holocaust literature. A frequent point of criticism centers on the privileging of the non-Jewish savior narrative. These narratives are a non-Jewish character as the central figure who rescues or assists Jewish victims. This focus, critics argue, inadvertently diminishes the agency and resilience of Jewish individuals during the Holocaust. Furthermore, anxieties exist concerning the potential for Holocaust fiction to unintentionally solidify a singular definition of Jewish identity solely rooted in suffering and victimhood. This reductionist approach risks obscuring the tapestry so rich of Jewish culture before the war and the experiences that existed during the Holocaust. This analysis underscores the need for a nuanced approach towards Holocaust fiction and its focus of representation. While perpetuating memory and fostering empathy remains a valuable lens through which one reads about the event, it is necessary to ensure accuracy, a multifaceted understanding of the Jewish identity, and an approach that balances responsibility to the past and the future. English texts written since 2000 endeavor to expand the range of verisimilitude in Holocaust representation by exploring new terrain in depiction of this horrific event. These include attempts to imagine how the Nazi perpetrators conceived of themselves, how descendants of the victims relate to the experiences of their forebears, how history may have developed otherwise, and how individual stories can be relayed by authors with vastly different personal coordinates, literary skills, and personal background.